It was supposed to be just another normal day. A day like any other, really. But in hindsight, I should have known that nothing would ever be the same again. Not after that moment. I had always considered Emily, my best friend, to be my ride or die. She was the one who had been there through every breakup, every awkward family gathering, and every late night confession. I trusted her with everything, my thoughts, my secrets, and yes, my heart. And then there was Chris. My ex.we had broken up months ago, and I had convinced myself that I was over him. Sure, it stung when it first ended, and there were moments when I still found myself scrolling through his social media, missing what we once had. But time heals all wounds, right? At least that's what I had hoped for. I remember when Chris and I first started dating. He was everything I thought I wanted, charming, funny, and good looking. But over time, the cracks started to show. We'd argue over small things, and I found myself questioning whether I was really happy, or just scared of being alone. And then, after one too many fights, I made the decision to end it. It wasn't easy, but I thought I'd made the right choice. I never expected that Emily would be the one to betray me. It started with little things at first. Like when we'd all hang out, and I'd catch Emily looking at me in that way, like she was trying to figure out if she could make me feel comfortable with what I couldn't yet name. Chris had moved on quickly, which shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. I'd see him around town, out with some new girl, and it twisted something inside me. I wanted to be okay with it. I told myself I was okay with it. But then one night, Emily invited me over for dinner. We hadn't hung out much since I broke up with Chris, and I thought this was a good opportunity to catch up. When I arrived, I noticed the strange tension in the air. Emily was acting off. Too eager, too quiet. Her usual sarcastic wit was gone. I shrugged it off, attributing it to stress from work, or maybe just her usual quirks. We sat on the couch, eating takeout and chatting about life. The conversation was nice, nothing unusual. But when I went to the bathroom, I came back to something that made my stomach drop. Chris had sent Emily a message. I don't know why, but something compelled me to glance at her phone, just as it buzzed with a notification. The message preview was all too familiar. Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be over at 8. I froze. I'm not sure what happened next, whether my hands were shaking from the sudden realization. But in that moment, everything clicked into place. All those little moments where Emily had seemed a little too interested in what I was doing, in what Chris was doing, suddenly made sense. She wasn't just being a supportive friend. She was hiding something from me. Something I wasn't ready to face. I looked at her, and she didn't even try to hide the guilt in her eyes. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain herself. She just smiled softly, the kind of smile I had always thought was meant for me, but now I realized it had never been for me at all. I took a breath. You're seeing him, aren't you? Her smile faltered for a second before she nodded. Yeah, I didn't know how to tell you, and I cut her off. She looked away, guilt flooding her face, and then whispered, a few weeks. After you and Chris broke up, I didn't want to hurt you. But I didn't let her finish. The betrayal hit me like a wave, and for a second I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Disbelief? All of it, probably. My best friend, the person I had trusted with everything, had been secretly dating my ex behind my back. And she didn't even have the decency to tell me. I didn't know what I wanted more at that moment. To scream or to cry. But neither felt right. So, I did the only thing I could do. I got up, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door. I didn't even look back. The days after that confrontation with Emily were a blur. I went through the motions, forcing myself to keep busy with work and friends, but every time I tried to focus on something, my mind kept drifting back to the moment I walked out of her apartment. To the look in her eyes when she realized I knew the truth. It was a mixture of guilt, regret, and something else, something colder, like she had always known this would happen, but never really cared. I tried to tell myself that I was done with it. That I didn't need to waste my energy on people who clearly didn't care about me. But the more I pushed the thoughts away, the louder they seemed to get. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing things. Little moments that I had brushed off before but now seemed glaringly obvious. I remember the first time it happened. I was sitting at a coffee shop with some friends, scrolling through my phone when I saw a photo Emily had posted on Instagram. She looked great, as always, laughing with friends, her arms around someone. At first I thought it was just a random night out, but then I saw him. Chris. Standing right next to her, his arm around her waist like they were the perfect couple. I stared at the photo, my pulse starting to race. They both looked so natural together, like they had been doing this for a while. I felt that bitter knot tighten in my stomach. I had known they were seeing each other, but seeing it so publicly, like they were rubbing it in my face, made everything feel so much worse. I tried to brush it off, but it lingered. Then there was the text. I didn't mean to snoop, but something told me I needed to. Emily had messaged me that night to check in, asking how I was doing. I thought it was odd, considering everything that had happened, but I responded politely, trying to keep things cordial. But then I noticed the timing. Just an hour before she had messaged me, I had received a notification from Chris. It wasn't much a simple "Hey, what's up?" But then I saw her reply. I couldn't help myself. I clicked on their conversation. And there it was, a string of messages between Emily and Chris, filled with inside jokes, plans to meet up, and flirty comments. My heart sank with every word I read. These weren't just casual exchanges, these were intimate, personal moments between two people who had been pretending like I didn't exist. They had been talking behind my back for weeks, and I was the last to know. I tear hurt to read it. I felt sick to my stomach. But what really pissed me off was the casualness of it all. Emily had been acting like everything was fine when she knew damn well what was going on. She had the audacity to text me like we were still friends, to pretend like everything was normal, when she was sneaking around with my ex. As the days went by, I couldn't stop the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I started picking up on other small clues. Emily suddenly posting more pictures with Chris, always in the same places, laughing, looking like a happy couple. There were comments that caught my eye too. People started tagging them together, calling them relationship goals. The comments were nothing short of disgusting to me, like some sick form of validation for something that felt so wrong. I had been trying to keep my distance from both of them, but the constant reminders on social media, in conversations, even in mutual friends' gossip kept dragging me back in. I couldn't escape it. And that's when I realized that I couldn't just let this slide anymore. They weren't even trying to hide it. When I saw Emily post a story on Instagram of her and Chris laughing together at a concert, it wasn't even a subtle hint. It was a full-on confession, wrapped up in a cute filter and a hashtag. The caption read, "Just when you think you've found the one. Blessed. It took everything in me not to lose it. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream at her, call her out in front of everyone, and make her admit what she had done. But then I stopped myself. I didn't need to chase after her validation anymore. I didn't need to beg her to understand how much she'd hurt me. What I needed was control. I needed to be the one to call the shots, to expose them both for what they really were. I had done my best to keep the peace. I had tried to stay silent, to accept the situation for what it was. But it was time for the truth to come out. And I was going to make sure it did. I had spent weeks trying to avoid them both, telling myself that I didn't need to keep tabs on Emily or Chris. But every time I scrolled through my social media, every time I ran into mutual friends, I was reminded of what they had done. The anger festered, the betrayal eating away at me like a slow-burning fire. I knew that if I didn't do something soon, I'd lose my mind. It was like I was being suffocated by their secret, and I needed air. I kept my distance from Emily, but I couldn't help but notice the small things. The way she'd respond to my texts with increasingly cold replies. The way Chris would message me casually at first, like he was trying to keep me in the loop, but with every conversation, it felt more and more like a performance. Like we were both pretending that there wasn't anything wrong. Then, one night, I was sitting at home, mindlessly flipping through Netflix, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "Hey, I know things are weird between us right now, but I hope we can still be friends. I really miss you." I stared at the message for a few seconds, unsure of how to respond. I wanted to call her out right there. I wanted to ask her, how can we still be friends when you've been dating my ex behind my back for weeks? But part of me, some stupid part of me, still clung to the idea that maybe we could salvage our friendship. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt me this much. I typed a reply, "We need to talk. It's been a while since I found out what's been going on, and I need answers." She responded almost instantly, "Of course. Let's meet tomorrow." I agreed, knowing that I was walking into a confrontation that I wasn't sure I was ready for. But I couldn't keep pretending like nothing had happened. I needed closure. And I wasn't about to get that by pretending to be okay with everything. The next day, we met at a quiet cafe near my apartment. Emily was already sitting at a table by the window when I walked in. Her usual smile was gone, replaced by a tense look on her face. She didn't even stand up when I approached. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick, like we both knew the conversation we were about to have was going to change everything. I don't know why you're doing this, I finally said, my voice low but firm. I don't know why you thought this was okay. But I need to hear it from you. Why did you do it, Emily? Her eyes flickered away from mine for a moment, and she took a deep breath before speaking. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I know it looks bad, but I didn't plan it. It just happened. Just happened. I repeated, incredulous. You've been secretly dating Chris for weeks, Emily. How is that just something that happened? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers nervously tapping on her coffee cup. I know it was wrong. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But Chris and we started talking after you guys broke up. I didn't want to hurt you, but it just felt right. I didn't want to lose him, you know. I shook my head, my chest tightening with frustration. I get it, you like him. But why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret like I'm some kind of fool? Emily's gaze softened, but her tone was defensive. I thought you'd be mad, obviously. I didn't want to make things worse. And honestly, I wasn't sure how to tell you. I didn't know how to deal with it. I stared at her for a long time, trying to make sense of her words. But all I could feel was the sting of her betrayal. I had trusted her more than anyone. And now I was sitting here, listening to her excuse everything. You should have told me. I would have respected you more if you had just been honest, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Instead, you played this game behind my back, with him. My ex, you knew what that would do to me. Emily's eyes filled with guilt. I know. And I hate myself for it. I never wanted to hurt you. I'm sorry. I stared at her for a long moment, weighing her apology. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. She had crossed a line that felt unforgivable, and the more she spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her dating Chris. It was about her lack of respect for me, for our friendship, for everything we had shared. I don't know if I can keep being friends with you after this, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I thought you were my best friend. But now I see you for what you really are. Emily's face fell. And for a moment, I saw the vulnerability she had always tried to hide. I didn't mean for it to end like this, she whispered. But I was already standing up, grabbing my bag. It's too late for apologies, Emily. I need time. Time away from you. From this whole mess. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind. The moment the door shut behind me, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something darker. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. The truth was out now. But what was next? How could I move on from this? And more importantly, how could I ever trust anyone again? The days after my confrontation with Emily were like a slow-motion train wreck. I had made the decision to sever ties with her, but the fallout was far more complicated than I had anticipated. I had expected some anger from her, maybe even some resentment, but nothing could have prepared me for the cold silence that followed. For the first few days, I didn't hear from her at all. Part of me thought she might take the hint, give me the space I needed, and accept that our friendship was over. But the silence was eerie, unnerving. Every time my phone buzzed, I would check it, half hoping for a message from Emily, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. But instead, it was always something else, work notifications, random texts from mutual friends, but no Emily. I couldn't help but wonder if she was out there, trying to avoid me, or worse, planning her next move. Part of me almost felt guilty for how quickly I'd shut her out. She was my best friend, after all. We'd been through so much together. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had made the right decision. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine, while she was sneaking behind my back with Chris. Still, the absence of communication from her gnawed at me. It felt like a wound that hadn't fully healed yet. I didn't know if she was ashamed, angry, or just too stubborn to face the consequences of her actions. Then, out of nowhere, I received a message from Chris. Hey, can we talk? It took everything in me not to roll my eyes. Of course, now he wanted to talk. After everything that had happened, after I had caught them both in their lies, now he wanted to clear the air. I didn't respond at first, unsure of how to handle the situation. Part of me wanted to ignore him completely, to move on with my life without dealing with any of this drama anymore. But another part of me, one that still craved closure, wanted to know what he had to say. So, I replied. What do you want, Chris? He responded almost immediately. I know this is messy, but I never meant to hurt you. Emily and I, we just started talking. And things developed faster than we thought. I don't want you to think I'm some kind of villain here. I could almost hear his voice in the text. It was casual, almost too casual for what had happened between us. Like he was trying to distance himself from the mess he had caused. I felt that familiar anger bubbling up again. But I held it back. There was something about this message that seemed so rehearsed, like he had planned it out before hitting send. Well, you definitely succeeded in hurting me, Chris. So what do you want from me now? I typed back, trying to keep my emotions in check. I don't know, he replied. Maybe we can talk in person. I really just want to make this right. If that's possible. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. I had no interest in hearing him justify what they had done. But a small part of me, some part that wasn't ready to completely cut them both out of my life, was tempted. Maybe I needed to hear it from him too. Maybe I needed him to confirm everything I already knew. That I wasn't the crazy one in this situation. That I wasn't imagining the betrayal. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We arranged to meet at a park, somewhere neutral, somewhere public. I had no idea what to expect. All I knew was that I needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, talking to him would give me some semblance of closure. When I arrived at the park, I spotted Chris sitting on a bench by the fountain, looking as relaxed as ever. He didn't seem the least bit concerned about the tension hanging between us. As I walked up to him, he stood and gave me a small, apologetic smile. Thanks for meeting me, he said, his voice softer than usual. I folded my arms, trying to keep my guard up. Let's get this over with. He nodded and sat back down, gesturing for me to take a seat. I get why you're angry. Honestly, I do. I should've been upfront with you from the start. I guess I just didn't want to hurt you. I couldn't help it. I laughed bitterly. Hurt me? You think you didn't hurt me by sneaking around with Emily? Do you even understand what you've done? Chris's face tightened. I'm not saying I didn't mess up, but I'm telling you, it wasn't like I planned it. Emily and I we clicked. Things happened fast. I didn't want to keep lying to you, but I didn't know how to tell you without making everything worse. I leaned in, my voice cold. You didn't think about me for 1 second, did you? Not once, while you were clicking with my ex. You didn't think about what it would do to me. And now you're here, acting like you're the victim in this situation. I never meant for it to happen like this, Chris repeated, his tone pleading now. I care about you. But I also care about Emily. I didn't want to lose either of you. I felt the weight of his words settle over me. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. He wasn't even apologizing for what he'd done. He was just explaining himself, trying to make himself look better. I wasn't buying it anymore. Chris, I said, shaking my head, you don't get it. It's not about Emily. It's about the betrayal. It's about the fact that you both were lying to me, and I didn't deserve that. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I cut him off. I don't need you to explain yourself anymore. I'm done. I need you both out of my life. I don't want to be a part of whatever this is. And with that, I stood up, leaving him sitting there, looking lost and confused. As I walked away, I could feel the weight of it all lift from my shoulders, even though the pain was still there, sharp and fresh. I had made my decision. I was done with both of them. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. There was still something missing, something I needed to do. And I wouldn't rest until I had it. The days after my confrontation with Chris felt like I was living in a haze. I had finally told him exactly what I needed to say, but the sense of relief that came with it was fleeting. I thought it would feel like a weight lifted off my chest, but instead, it left me with a hollow feeling. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was grieving. Grieving for the friendship I had lost, grieving for the trust that had been shattered, and, honestly, grieving for the person I used to be before all of this happened. I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. If I had been more aware, more attentive, maybe I would have seen the signs earlier. But then again, maybe I hadn't been blind, I had been trusting. And that was my biggest mistake. It was a rainy afternoon, when I finally decided I needed to do something about the emptiness I felt. I hadn't heard from Emily or Chris since our last encounters. Emily had tried to message me a few times, but I ignored her texts. She'd apologized, said she missed me. But I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. Chris, too, sent his fair share of half-hearted apologies. But I had long since stopped believing anything they said. I realized, then, the only person I had left to consider was me. And I needed to stop letting their actions define how I felt about myself. I had been angry. Yes, but more than that, I had been a victim of their choices. It was time to stop being the victim and start taking control of my own story. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts, when I came across the number I hadn't called in months. It was my therapist's number. After everything had gone down with Chris and Emily, I had stopped going to therapy. But now, I knew I needed it again. I needed to untangle all the emotions that were still swirling inside them. I called the number. And within minutes, I had an appointment set for later that week. I spent time with myself, no longer wrapped up in the chaos of Emily and Chris's betrayal. I took walks around the city, found solace in small activities, reading, cooking, even binge watching old shows I used to love. I realized that the silence wasn't a bad thing. But as I sat down across from Dr. Martin, I knew it was the right choice. He was the same calm, understanding presence I remembered from our past sessions, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I've been struggling, I admitted, my voice shaky at first. I don't know how to move past what happened with Emily and Chris. He nodded, his expression empathetic. You don't need to have all the answers today. It's okay to still be in the process of figuring things out. But tell me, what's been the hardest part for you? The betrayal, I said without hesitation. I feel like I gave everything to both of them, my trust, my time, my friendship, and they both just threw it all away. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again. Dr. Martin paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. It's understandable to feel that way, especially after something so painful. But trust is something that is built, not given. You gave it freely, but now it's time for you to take that trust back. And this time, trust yourself more than anyone else. You can learn to trust again, but it has to start with you. His words struck a chord deep within me. Trust myself. That was the one thing I hadn't considered. I had been so focused on the betrayal, so consumed by what Emily and Chris had done, that I had forgotten the one person who had never betrayed myself. The session ended, and I left the office feeling lighter. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. I had finally acknowledged my feelings, and was ready to move forward. I was no longer letting Emily and Chris define who I was or how I saw the world. A few weeks later, I saw a post on social media from Emily. She had uploaded a picture of herself and Chris at some local art exhibit, looking happy and content. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, but it was fleeting. The feeling was unfamiliar, like a dull ache that had once been sharp, but had now softened. I didn't wish them ill, but I also didn't care. They were a part of my past now, and it was time to let go. I deleted my social media for good. No more checking on them, no more comparing my life to theirs. It was my life now, and I was going to live it on my own terms. I didn't need them to be happy. A few months later, I moved to a new city for a fresh start. The old me was gone, but I was becoming someone stronger, more resilient. I had learned what it meant to value myself, to put myself first. I never saw Emily or Chris again. They remained in the past where they belonged. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The wound had healed, and though there would always be a scar, it no longer hurt. I was free.